Greetings. Today we continue our study of the names of God. Today we will undertake the 18th and final one for now in this series entitled Jehovah El Bethel, or El Bethel, as some would pronounce it. We have two verses for text that come from Genesis. First in chapter 33 and verse 20. This is after Jacob has returned. It says, he erected there an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. In chapter 35 and verse number 7, it speaks about the fact that on his way back, he builds an altar at a place that he previously called Bethel. And it says, and he built there an altar and called it El Bethel, because there God appeared unto him when he fled from the face of his brother. These names break down to be this way. In chapter 33 and verse 20, the name El Elohe Israel simply refers to the fact that the God, the three strong ones bound by an oath, is now taken in a personal relationship by Israel, the name that replaced the name of Jacob or trickster. He is now called a prince with God, and we'll have more of that later in the message. El Bethel, Beth is house, El meaning God, thus the house of God. On his first arrival at the place, Jacob was intrigued by the place, the house of God. He called it the gate of heaven. But now Jacob has learned that the person of God is the important thing. The gate of heaven is a person and not a place. As Jesus spoke later in the New Testament in John chapter 2, verses 7 and verse 9, about how that he was the door, the only door, and if any man wanted to gain access to the sheepfold, he had to go through that door, being himself. Now we begin the first major point, the place, Bethel, or Luz, in Genesis 28:19. In verse 16, he says, surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. There is no place on the earth where the presence of God is not present. The emphasis here is a link of the verse of Jehovah to the place of Bethel. This is a fact that's presented throughout scriptures. Often our problem is, as Jacob's was on this occasion, that we have not fully recognized or acknowledged that fact, that wherever we are, God is. He says in verse 17, this is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. As you read the chapter, you find that Jacob dreamed a dream of a ladder which reached to heaven. He saw the angels of God, quote, as he said, ascending and descending this ladder. So he saw the angels moving from heaven to earth and back again. I want to point out that man's perspective is always backwards. Notice Jacob said they were ascending and then descending. Well, technically, from God's perspective, the angels are commissioned for a task. They descend to accomplish that task and then ascend back to their place of origin and give report to God when they are finished. It is important for us to remember that very often we see things exactly backward from God's perspective. Jacob believed that he had found the place where God dwelled and from which one could access heaven. But Jacob will learn better during the next 20 years of his life. As we come to Genesis 29:1, it speaks of the land of the people of the east. You might remember that in Job 1:3, Job is called the greatest of all the men of the East. The area that we're talking about is commonly referred to as the Fertile Crescent, sitting above the great desert area which lies to the east of Israel. Ur of the Chaldees is in the southeastern corner of the Arabian desert. Jerusalem is toward the southwest corner of the Arabian desert. But the general practice was to not traverse the desert, but to get to Canaan from Ur, you traveled north-northwest to Haran, and then south-southwest to Canaan. This was the journey which Abraham had taken in arriving, and now Jacob is backtracking halfway to Ur to the place called Haran, and there he stops at Luz or Bethel.